How does a man reach the point where his own belongings sit in the garage like trash, while his son-in-law tells him he no longer lives in his own house? How could they be so sure I was weak when every brick in that house was still legally under my name? What they did not know was that I had spent years building quiet protection for myself, and their little power show had just turned the key. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Gordon Price, and I'm 63 years old. I spent my whole working life as a building inspector for the city. I was the quiet man who checked the walls, the foundations, the hidden beams. People did not pay much attention to me, but they trusted my stamp on their projects. When I retired, I thought I would finally rest inside a house that I understood better than any place in the world. I had checked every nail when it was built. I knew every creak in the floor. On that day, I drove home like I always did. It was late afternoon, the kind of time when the sun hits the front of the house and makes the white paint look warm. I remember thinking that I might sit on the porch with a cup of tea. My knees were stiff from the drive, and I was looking forward to putting my feet up. When I turned into the driveway, my hands tightened on the steering wheel. The garage door was open wide, but that was not what surprised me. My belongings were there, stacked in uneven piles, almost spilling onto the driveway. My old armchair leaned sideways against a broken lamp. Boxes with my name and my late wife's handwriting sat on top of a rolled-up rug. Beside them, there were bags of old clothes and a cracked bookshelf, all pushed together like a pile left for pickup. For a moment, I did not understand what I was seeing. I parked and stepped out of the car. The evening air felt heavier than usual. I walked closer and saw my winter coat hanging over a cardboard box, half on, half off, as if someone had dragged it without care. My work journals from the building department, the ones I kept for years, were stacked near a plastic bin with Christmas decorations that belonged to my wife. It looked like a corner of a thrift store, not the garage of my own home. Then I noticed Brandon and his father, Russell, standing near the side of the driveway. Brandon had his hands on his hips. Russell leaned against the fence, watching. They did not look surprised to see me. They looked like they were waiting. Brandon spoke first. His tone was casual, almost cheerful. He said that it was time to clear space because I did not live in the house anymore. He said the guest room was needed for his father now, and this was the easiest way to start. He said they had talked about it and decided. I stood there and listened. I kept my face calm, the way I used to when a contractor tried to argue with me on a job site. I felt my pulse in my ears, steady but stronger than normal. I looked down at my belongings again. The boxes did not just hold things. They held years of my life. The first toolbox I bought after trade school, old photo frames, a stack of notebooks where I had written ideas for repairs, projects I never had time to do. I asked Brandon when we had agreed that I no longer lived there. He shrugged and told me that we had discussed it many times. He said that I had said I wanted a smaller place, that I needed something easier, and that now they were just helping that plan move forward. He spoke as if he did me a favor. Russell said that an older man like me would be more comfortable in a small unit with other people my age. He said I should enjoy my time and not hold up the young family. He said they needed space now and that this was natural. Lena stood in the doorway behind them. My daughter held a dish towel in her hands. She did not come down the steps. She watched me with a tight face. When our eyes met, she looked away and said in a soft voice that this was better for everyone, that we had talked about it. She said she thought I understood. I felt something inside me shift, very slowly. It was not a burst of anger. It was more like a door closing in my mind. For years I had tried to be easy. I had tried not to make trouble. On that driveway, with my memories piled up like broken furniture, I understood how that looked to them. I told Brandon, in a steady voice, that if they were cleaning junk out of my house, then I could take care of one more piece of junk myself. I did not raise my voice. I did not step closer. I only said it once, but I let him see that I meant it. His smile faded for a second. Then he laughed it off and said I was just upset. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a teenage neighbor walking his dog. The boy slowed down, staring at the scene. He lifted his phone in that casual way people do now. I did not know if he was checking messages or recording. Maybe both. I felt a wave of embarrassment wash over me. The house I paid for, the one I kept up through wind, snow, and long summers, was now the stage for my own removal. Brandon told me we should go inside and talk like adults. He said they did not want upset neighbors. He made it sound like I was the problem. I stepped past the piles of my belongings and walked into the house. The air inside smelled like dinner and cleaning spray. The living room looked different. The big family photo over the fireplace no longer showed the original image. In the old photo, my wife and I stood in the center at Lena's wedding, with Brandon at our side. Now there was a new collage frame. The central picture was Brandon, Lena, little Mia, and Russell on the porch. I was in a small photo on the side, sitting in a chair with Mia on my lap. If someone stood in front of that part, you would not see me at all. We sat down. Brandon took the armchair that had been my favorite spot. Lena sat on the couch. I took the dining chair near the doorway. Russell stayed standing, as if he were part of some inspection team. I almost smiled at that, but the feeling did not reach my mouth. Lena spoke first. She said that they had been thinking about this for a long time, and that they believed it was time for a change. She reminded me that I had said, after my wife passed, that one day I might move somewhere simpler. She repeated those old words as if they were a signed document. She said that the house was too big and that I often seemed tired. She said I should not carry the weight of it anymore. Brandon added that the house was now their responsibility. He said that they paid the bills, that they took care of the day-to-day things, and that I should trust them to manage the space. He said that giving his father the guest room was the right thing to do, and that I should be happy the family was close. I listened. I thought of the years when I had written the checks for the mortgage. I thought of the nights I had come home late from work, putting on a second coat of paint or fixing a leak so Lena could wake up in a warm, dry room. I thought of my wife sitting at this same table, circling items in a catalog and talking about curtains. I asked calmly what exactly they expected me to do. Lena said they wanted me to move into a retirement unit they had found. She said they had already spoken to a place across town. She said it was small but comfortable and that it had group activities. She talked about it as if she was reading from a pamphlet. She mentioned a shuttle, shared meals, and a small garden where residents could grow flowers. I asked who would pay for this new place. Brandon said that once the house was fully in their hands, they would help. He said it was fair because they were the ones raising a child and planning for the future. He said a smaller place would be cheaper anyway. Then he moved quickly past that point, as if money was only a side detail. Russell told me that he had already started moving some of his things into the guest room closet. He said he was glad to finally have a stable roof over his head. He said he had worked hard all his life and that he deserved some comfort now. He did not mention that I had also worked hard all my life. As they spoke, I looked around the room. My wife's old blue cushion was gone from the couch. The small wooden box where I kept spare keys was no longer on the shelf. The house felt familiar and strange at the same time, like someone had moved the walls a few inches while I was at the store. I realized then that this was not a sudden idea. This was something they had been building slowly, piece by piece, while I was busy trying to be easy to live with. Each small change, each little joke about me finding a nice quiet place of my own was part of a path. Now I stood at the end of it. I could have argued. I could have raised my voice. I have seen many people react that way on job sites and in meetings. It never helped them. The person who shouts loses control. The person who stays calm keeps the room. So I kept my voice even. I asked to see any papers I had signed that said I agreed to move out. Brandon said there was no one paper, only a clear understanding. He used those words. Clear understanding. He also said that I trusted him and Lena to handle paperwork. He said nothing would be a problem as long as I did my part and moved out on time. Lena looked uncomfortable when he said that. For a second, I saw the young girl who used to run to the door when I came home from work. Then the moment was gone, and she looked down at her hands. I did not push. I nodded slowly and said I heard what they wanted. I told them that I would need some time to think. I told them I did not like the way my belongings were sitting in the garage and that this should not happen again. I did not shout. I just stated it. Brandon rolled his eyes slightly, but agreed in a light tone. He said they would be more careful. He said they just got carried away with cleaning and planning. He said he was sure we could work everything out. The conversation ended there. Lena stood and said she had to check on Mia. Russell went to the kitchen to refill his glass. Brandon walked outside, talking loudly to someone on his phone about new plans for the house. I sat alone in the living room for a few minutes. The television was off. I could hear the faint sound of traffic from the main road and the soft click of cupboard doors in the kitchen. I felt the weight of the house around me, the beams, the pipes, the old wiring I had updated with my own hands. For the first time, I understood that the people inside did not see me as part of that structure anymore. I was just another item they could move, like a chair or a lamp. I stood up and walked back to the garage. The late afternoon light had turned orange, and the shadows of the boxes stretched across the concrete floor. I picked up my winter coat, shook the dust from it, and hung it neatly over my arm. Then I sat down on an upside-down crate beside my pile of things. I rested my hands on my knees and looked at everything I owned, pushed to one side of the room. It felt like I was inspecting a building after a long project, taking in the work, the flaws, and what had been done without my approval. I did not know exactly what I would do next, but I knew one thing very clearly. I was not just another piece of junk in someone else's house. I did not sleep well that night. I lay in my bed and listened to the house. The pipes, the fridge, the faint movement of footsteps down the hall. It sounded different now. It sounded like a place where I was only visiting. While I stared at the ceiling, my mind went back over the years. I tried to remember where exactly things had started to bend in this direction. It was hard to find a single point. It was more like watching a slow change of weather. Clear sky, then a thin cloud, then shade, and one day you look up and the whole sky is gray. After my wife passed, the house felt too quiet. I still came home from work, even though retirement was getting close and I would call out her name by habit. Then I would remember there was no answer coming. Some nights I just sat at the kitchen table, reading old inspection reports, because I did not know what else to do. Lena worried about me. Back then, it came from a good place. She visited often. She brought meals and talked about her job and her plans with Brandon. One evening, she sat across from me and said that she was anxious about rent in the city and how they were trying to save for a place. She said they spent so much each month and still felt stuck. She said that my house was too big for one person. I told her that I was fine and that she should not worry so much. But later that night, I sat in the empty living room and looked at the extra rooms. I could hear only my own steps. The next time they came over, I said that if they wanted to stay for a while, they could. I said it would be nice to hear other voices in the house again. They moved in 3 months later. They said it would be for a year, maybe 2, until they got on their feet. I helped them carry boxes. I gave them the larger bedroom and kept the smaller one for myself. Lena hugged me and said that I was saving their future. Brandon clapped me on the shoulder and said that he would not forget how generous I was. In those first months, things felt almost like a second chance. There was noise in the kitchen, laughter from the hallway, a little clutter in the living room. I did not mind it. When Mia was born, I walked the floors at night with her in my arms so they could sleep. I changed light bulbs, fixed loose cabinet doors, and kept the yard neat. It felt like a role I understood. The first little shift came at a small restaurant near the house. It was a casual place, nothing special, with bright lights and a TV on the wall. We went there to celebrate the first big contract for Brandon's renovation company. I had helped him get started. I had given him money from my savings to buy tools and pay early wages. I had told him that I believed in his work. At the restaurant, he told the waiter that his whole team was there. He nodded at Lena as his partner, at Mia in a booster seat as his motivation, and at me as his silent supporter. He said that phrase and laughed. His friends from school were there too. One of them asked me what I used to do. I told him that I was a building inspector. Brandon jumped in and said that I was retired now and that I spent most of my time at home, resting and drinking tea. He said it with a grin, like a joke. His friend laughed and said that this sounded like a dream. I smiled, but inside I felt something pinch. I knew I had not retired yet. I was still working part-time. I still knew more about the city's codes than anyone at that table. Later that night, as we drove home, I mentioned that the joke had stung a bit. Brandon said I should relax and not take it so seriously. He said that people liked light stories. He said that nobody wanted to hear about inspections and reports over dinner. It did not stop there. Over time, those small jokes started to repeat. When new people came to the house, Brandon would say that he and Lena were taking care of the place now, and that I just got to enjoy my golden years. He meant it as a light remark, but he used it often. The words started to change the way visitors looked at me. At some point, we reached the subject of the house itself. After my wife passed, I had set up some paperwork at a small law office. I wanted to make sure that Lena was protected if something happened to me. The lawyer suggested a trust. He talked about rights, future interests, and conditions. I listened carefully. I remember asking him to make sure that I could stay in the house for as long as I lived. He said that could be written clearly. I signed the papers with a steady hand. Back then, I did not imagine that I would need to defend my right to sit in my own living room. When Lena and Brandon moved in, I told them in simple terms that I had arranged things so that Lena would be safe one day, but that I planned to stay in the house as long as I was able. They both said they understood. Lena looked touched. Brandon said it was smart planning. Years passed. I retired fully. Without my daily routine, I leaned even more on small tasks around the house. I fixed loose railings, repainted the porch, and checked the roof after storms. I did these things because I cared about the place, not because anyone asked. Sometimes Brandon thanked me. Sometimes he criticized my methods and said that he would have done it faster. He started his own renovation business soon after moving in. He came to me with a plan written on a notepad. He explained that he needed a loan to get started. A bank had offered terms, but the interest was high. He said that if I helped him, the money would stay in the family. He said that he would pay me back with interest and that I would see a return. He said that this was how families built something together. I believed him. I went to the bank with him and co-signed the loan. I also gave him a personal loan from my savings and kept the contract in my home office. I did not push him about it. I told myself that his success would be my reward, and that Lena and Mia would be comfortable because of it. At first, Brandon worked hard. He came home tired and covered in dust. He asked me for advice about materials and safety. I was glad to share what I knew. He listened then. As his business grew, his tone changed. He spoke more like a man who believed he had built everything on his own. I remember visiting my old office a year after I retired. I brought a box of donuts for the staff. The young inspector at the front desk stood up and shook my hand. He said that they still followed my notes on old buildings. He said that contractors mentioned my name with respect. I left that office walking a little taller. On the way home, I stopped at a shop and bought a small toy car for Mia. When I walked into the house, Brandon's crew was in the living room, using my dining table to look at plans. One of them asked who I was. Brandon told him that I was just the landlord and the older guy who lets us use the space. He did not say I was his father-in-law. He did not say that I had helped him get the business off the ground. I stood there holding the toy car and listened. Later that night, I told him that his words had hurt. He said I was too sensitive. He said that on job sites, people use simple labels and that it did not mean anything. He said I should not bring emotion into business talk. He always had a reason ready for his words. Then came the small changes inside the house. My tools, once neatly arranged on the shelf in the garage, started to move. Brandon said that his workers needed them. Some never returned. My old work manuals disappeared from the bookshelf. When I asked Lena about them, she said she had packed them away because they looked cluttered. The family photos slowly changed, with more images of Brandon's side and fewer of the older years. One day, Lena sat with me in the kitchen and showed me listings on her laptop. She said that she had found some lovely senior units. She said they had nice gardens and common rooms. She said she could imagine me making friends there, playing cards, going on small trips. I listened. I told her that I was not ready to move out of my house. She said she understood, but smiled in a way that told me she disagreed. From then on, the topic came up more often. If I complained about a noisy night or clutter in the hallway, Brandon would say that this was normal in a full house, and that if I wanted quiet, a smaller place might be better. If I asked about a bill, he would say that he was handling things now, and that I should not worry. Slowly, the language shifted. They stopped saying that they lived with me, and started saying that we all lived together, and then that I lived with them. When relatives visited, Brandon told them that he and Lena had taken Dad in after my wife passed, as if I had needed a rescue. Some relatives knew the truth and looked uncomfortable. Others accepted the story and praised them for their kindness. When I raised an eyebrow at that, Lena told me not to make a scene. She said that words did not matter, that the important thing was that we were under one roof. I did not want to spoil family dinners, so I stayed quiet. Looking back, I can see how each small step led to the moment when I found my belongings in the garage. At the time, it felt like a series of small favors, small jokes, small decisions. I gave space, I gave money, I gave time, I gave my name to help their business. Each time, I thought I was helping my family. I thought I was making life easier for Lena and for Mia, but every time I stepped back, someone else stepped forward and took that space. My armchair became Brandon's favorite seat. My tools became standard gear for his crew. My role in the house shifted from owner to guest, and then from guest to problem. On the day I saw my things stacked in the garage, all those years pressed down on me at once. The jokes at the restaurant, the way he called me the old guy at work, the way Lena spoke about retirement units as if she was organizing my future for me, the new photos on the wall. I understood then that they did not see it as betrayal. In their minds, this was simply the way things were supposed to go. The older man moves aside, the younger family steps into the center, the house becomes theirs. They had told the story so many times that they believed it. I had helped them by staying quiet. Standing there among the boxes, I realized that I had made one big mistake. I had treated my own position as something informal, something based only on feeling and trust. I had forgotten that the beams of this house were not just wood. They were also lines on paper, signatures, and rights I had asked for and paid for. Those things did not disappear just because someone told a different story at dinner. That night, alone in my room, I sat at my small desk and took out an old folder. Inside were copies of papers from the time after my wife passed. I had not looked at them in years. The pages were yellowing at the edges. I saw my own signature, neat and careful. I saw words that I had only half understood back then, but had insisted on, like a man checking the foundation of a building and insisting on extra support. I read them slowly, line by line, and felt something strong and quiet settle inside me. The next morning, I woke up before the rest of the house. It was still dim outside. For a moment, I lay there and listened. I could hear the faint hum of the fridge and the soft ticking of the hall clock. The house felt lighter in those early minutes before voices and footsteps filled it. I sat up, reached for the folder on my nightstand, and opened it again. I read each page slowly. There were long sentences, full of legal phrases, but some parts were clear enough. I saw that a trust had been created after my wife passed. I saw that the house was held inside it. I saw that my name was still written as the person with the right to live there for the rest of my life. The words were dry, but they carried weight. One line mentioned that respectful treatment and cooperation were expected from any people who lived in the house and hoped to benefit from it later. At the time, I had thought that this line was just a formality. Now it stood out like a bright mark on the page. I did not pretend to understand all of it. I am not a lawyer. I am a man who spent his life looking at concrete, beams, and pipes, but I know how to read a plan and how to listen for what is not said. Those pages told me that things were not as simple as Brandon and Lena claimed in the living room. When I left my room, the house had already begun its normal day. Mia was at the table, eating cereal and telling a story about something at preschool. Lena moved between the stove and the counter. Brandon scrolled through his phone in my old armchair, saying that a client was late on payment. Lena greeted me and asked if I had slept well. I told her that I had slept enough. I made tea and sat at the table. Mia climbed down from her chair and came to sit on my knees. She rested her head against my chest in the easy way that children do with people they feel safe with. I put my hand on her back and felt a small, steady breath. Lena watched us and smiled, but the smile faded when Brandon announced that he wanted to talk after breakfast. He said it in a way that turned the air heavy. I knew that this talk would not be about cartoons or school. After Mia left with Lena for preschool, Brandon asked me to come out to the backyard. The grass was a little long. The chairs were still damp from morning dew. We sat down at the small table under the tree. Russell joined us, carrying a mug. Brandon began by saying that he hoped I had understood what they had explained the day before. He said they were not trying to hurt me. He said they were just trying to set up the best structure for the family. Then he said they had decided on a time frame. He told me that they thought 30 days was enough for me to find a new place and move out. He said they had looked at a retirement community and already spoken to a manager there. He said that if I signed some forms, they could make the payments easier. Russell added that this would let them finally use the house in a way that fit their needs. He said that having 3 adults and a child in one house was too much pressure. I asked them if they understood that this was still my home. I kept my voice calm. I said that I had not agreed to any date. I said that I had not seen any paper that gave them the right to push me out. Brandon replied that the reality was different now. He said that he handled the bills and repairs, that he ran his company from here, and that it made sense that the house was basically theirs in practice. He said that the law would see it that way too, because I was old and retired. He used those words, old and retired. Russell nodded and said that I should not fight the natural order of things. He said that parents step aside when children form their own families. He said that this was how life moved forward. I listened and felt that same slow shift inside my chest. They were not just asking. They were trying to press me into a shape that fit their picture. They were using soft words for something hard. I did not argue. I said that I had heard them. I said that I did not accept the deadline. I said that I would look into my options. Brandon frowned and told me that there were no other options. He said that this was the plan and that it would be better for me if I accepted it without trouble. I let him talk. Then I stood up and said that I needed some air. I walked around the yard, touching the old fence and the trunk of the tree I had planted when Lena was a child. The wood felt solid under my hand. The tree's bark was rough and steady. These things had taken years to grow. They were not moved by quick words spoken over coffee. Later that morning, I left the house and walked down the street to a small cafe a few blocks away. It was a modest place with simple tables and big windows. I had gone there many times over the years. Usually I brought a book. That day I came with only my thoughts. I ordered tea and sat near the window. A few minutes later, I heard someone say my name. I looked up and saw Priya, my neighbor from 2 doors down. She wore her work badge on a lanyard. I knew that she worked at the county records office, but we mostly talked about gardens and weather. She asked if she could sit. I nodded. She looked at me for a moment and said that she had seen some of my belongings in the garage when she passed the house. She said that she hoped everything was okay. There was real concern in her voice. I could have brushed it off. For many years, that is what I would have done. I would have said that everything was fine, just a bit of cleaning. This time, I did not do that. I told her that there had been some changes in the house and that my son-in-law and daughter had spoken about me moving out. Priya listened quietly. She did not interrupt. When I finished, she said that she was sorry I was going through this. Then she asked if I had looked at my property records recently. She reminded me of where she worked and said that sometimes people forgot what was on file. I told her that I had some documents at home from years ago. I said that I remembered something about a trust and a right to live there, but that I did not know the details. She suggested that I come by her office one day and ask to see the official records. She said that she could not give legal advice, but that anyone had the right to view records that concerned their own property. Her suggestion was calm and practical. It fit the way my mind worked. I thanked her. We talked for a few more minutes about neutral things, then she left for work. I stayed at the table and stared at my reflection in the window. I did not see a helpless old man. I saw someone who had spent decades reading plans and checking details. I thought that maybe it was time to read the plan for my own life with the same care. In the afternoon, I went to the bank. It was the same branch where I had signed the loan for Brandon's business. The lobby smelled like paper and coffee. There were soft chairs along the wall and a long counter where clerks helped customers. I sat down with a clerk and asked to review my accounts and any loan documents where my name appeared. The clerk pulled up the details on the screen and printed copies for me. There was the personal loan I had given to Brandon, with a simple schedule of payments that he had never fully followed. There was also the co-signed business loan I had helped him get. At the bottom of that document, there was a clause that caught my eye. The clause stated that if the borrower misused funds related to the property or failed to treat the cosigner fairly in matters related to shared assets, the lender could review the terms. It said that in such a case, the bank reserved the right to ask for full payment or adjust conditions. At the time I signed it, I had not imagined needing it. It had seemed like just another piece of careful language. Now it looked like a lever. I thanked the clerk, put the copies in a folder, and walked back to my car. I sat there for a moment and read the clause again. I thought about how Brandon had used the house as his office, how he had introduced me to his crew, how he had spoken about who really owned the place. I thought about my belongings in the garage and his casual talk about moving me out. I drove home slowly. On the way, I passed my old city office. I did not stop, but I looked at the building and remembered how many times I had walked those halls with a clipboard in my hand. Back then, when I said that a wall needed more support, people listened. They did not always like it, but they listened. I had been so sure of my judgment at work. Somehow, in my own house, I had let that part of myself go quiet. That evening, after dinner, I went to my small room and closed the door. I spread the trust papers, the bank documents, and some old notes on my desk. I took out a pen and started underlining phrases: life estate, right to occupy, respectful treatment, review of terms. Each phrase was like a beam, a pillar, a support I had forgotten was there. I thought back over the years of small jokes and light stories told at my expense. I thought of the way my role had been shifted in introductions and in family talk. I realized that there was a pattern. It was not just careless humor, it was a slow rewrite of the story about who I was and what place I had in this house. I sat very still for a long time. Something inside me became very clear. I did not feel wild anger. I did not picture shouting or threats. I felt a firm line draw itself in my mind. On one side was the old way, where I laughed along and hoped that kindness would be enough. On the other side was a different way, where I would stand on the written structure I had already built and insist that it be respected. I understood that if I kept moving back, there would be no place left for me. They would take the house, my image, even the way my own granddaughter thought of me. It would all be turned into a story where I had already left. I also understood that I did not need to push anyone or break anything. The structure was already there, written in firm lines and signed years ago by my own hand. All I needed to do was bring it into the light and let it do its work. I put the papers back in the folder and wrote a small list on a notepad. County records, lawyer appointment, bank follow-up. Then I wrote one more line under them in neat letters: stop acting like a guest in my own life. 2 days later, I took my list from the nightstand and put it in my pocket. The words were simple, written in my own hand: county records, lawyer, bank. It felt like a small plan, but it was more than I had before. I walked to the cafe first and called Priya from there. I did not want to talk about all this in the kitchen with Brandon walking in and out. When she answered, I told her that I wanted to visit the records office. She said she would be at the counter that afternoon and that I could come by as a normal customer. Her tone was professional, but I could hear a note of quiet support. The county records office was a low, square building with glass doors. I had walked past it many times over the years without thinking much about it. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of paper and toner. There were filing cabinets, computer screens, and a long counter with staff on the other side. I took a number and waited on a plastic chair. When my number came up on the screen, I stepped to the counter. Priya greeted me with the same neutral smile she used for other people, but her eyes were warmer. I gave her my full name, the address of the house, and the year the trust was set up. She typed for a while, then pulled up a record on her screen. She explained that as a matter of policy she could not give opinions, but she could print documents that were public record. She slid a stack of copies across the counter. On the top page, my name was there, clear and firm. It said that I held a right to live in the house for the rest of my life. Below that, Lena's name and Brandon's name appeared as people with a future claim under certain conditions. I read the first paragraphs slowly. The words matched the old folder I had at home, but seeing them with the county seal at the top gave them more weight. There was also a record of a more recent attempt to file extra documents. A note showed that a change had been submitted but not completed due to missing authorization. Priya did not point to it, but my eyes went there on their own. I felt a cold calm settle in my stomach. Someone had tried to shift things without telling me, and the system had stopped it. Not because of kindness or respect, but because a line for my signature was empty. Priya cleared her throat gently and asked if I needed anything else. I shook my head and thanked her. As I turned to go, she spoke in a low voice and said that my late wife had planned well, and that some people did not understand how strong these documents could be. She suggested, again, that I talk to a lawyer who could explain things in simple terms. Outside, I stood on the steps and looked at the copies in my hand. The pages flapped a little in the wind. I folded them carefully and put them in the folder I had brought. Then I took out my phone and searched my contact list for the number of the lawyer who had helped us years ago. The office had changed names, but the address was the same. I called and made an appointment for the next day. When I came home, Lena was at the kitchen table with her laptop. She was looking at paint colors on the screen. She told me that she and Brandon were thinking of changing the living room next spring, making it brighter and more their style. She said the words without pausing, as if my style had never been part of the room at all. She also mentioned that the manager of the retirement place had called back. She said they had a unit free and that they could hold it if I decided quickly. She talked about shared dinners, game nights, a shuttle to the store. She spoke as if she was describing a vacation. I listened and stirred sugar into my tea. I asked her if she had ever read the trust documents. She blinked and said that she had not seen them in full. She said she trusted that everything was set up already and that she did not like paperwork. She said that Brandon handled those things. I nodded and said nothing more. That night, when Brandon came home, he walked into the kitchen and patted my shoulder. He said he hoped I was coming around and that he did not want things to be hard between us. He said that rushing the move would be good for everyone. His tone was friendly, but there was a firm edge under it. I told him that I had some things to check first. He frowned, but let it go. The next day, I took the bus downtown to the law office. The building was taller than the records office, with polished stone in the lobby and a guard at the desk. The elevator ride felt long. I watched the numbers light up one by one and thought about all the visits I had made with my late wife when we first set up the trust. Back then, we had stood shoulder to shoulder and signed papers with quiet smiles. We had thought of it as a gift to our future daughter. The receptionist at the law firm greeted me and asked me to wait. After a short time, a man in a simple suit came out and introduced himself as Caleb. He was not the same lawyer who had helped us years ago, but he worked at the same firm. He said he had reviewed my old file and that he would be happy to go over it with me. His office was lined with shelves of thick books. There was a window that looked out over the city roofs. He invited me to sit, and I placed my folder on his desk. I told him, in order, what had been happening at the house. I spoke about the boxes in the garage, the talk in the backyard, the 30-day plan, and the way Brandon and Russell spoke about the house as if it were already theirs. I also told him about the bank loan and the copy of the clause I had seen. Caleb took notes as I spoke. He did not react much, but he watched me closely. When I finished, he asked a few simple questions. Did I want to stay in the house? Yes. Had I ever signed anything saying I gave up that right? No. Did I feel safe there at the moment? I paused and then said that I felt unwelcome, but not in danger. He nodded. He pulled out the original trust file and read parts of it in silence. I sat and watched his eyes move back and forth over the page. He put one paper aside and took another. He made a small mark in the margin of one clause. From where I sat, I could not see the details, only the steady movement of his pen. Then he looked up and spoke in plain language. He said that my position in the house was stronger than my family believed. He said that the documents clearly gave me the right to live there as long as I wished, and that this right did not depend on their opinion or their comfort. He also said that certain behavior by people who hoped to benefit later could have consequences. He He did not go into depth yet. He just placed his hand on the folder and said that there were options. I listened carefully. I asked him if they could force me out. He said no, not under the current documents, unless I chose to leave. I asked if trying to move me by pressure alone could affect their future claim. He said that it could, if handled correctly. He spoke of changes that might be made, but he did not spread out any new papers yet. He was still in the stage of explaining, not acting. Caleb then turned to the copies of the bank loan I had brought. He read the clause I had underlined. He said that while he was not a bank officer, the wording gave room for a review if I could show that I was being treated in bad faith regarding the property. He explained that this did not mean loud drama. It meant clear records, dates, and actions. He leaned back and looked at me. He said that many people in my place reacted with anger and rushed into things. He said that this often made matters worse. Then he said that I seemed like a patient man, and that patience, together with clear documents, could be a very strong thing. We spoke about next steps in broad terms. He suggested that I begin to keep a careful record of what was happening, the photos of my belongings in the garage, notes on conversations, copies of messages. He said that if pressure increased, notes could show that this was not a friendly plan but a pattern. He also said that one day, if I chose, there could be a moment when all of this would be brought forward in a clear setting, with witnesses present. But he did not describe that moment in detail. He was not writing a story, he was building a structure. I left his office with my folder a little thicker. The pages inside were the same ones I had brought, but now they had small marks and sticky notes in the margins. They felt different in my hands. They felt less like old paper and more like tools. On the bus ride home, I watched the city move past the window. People went in and out of stores. Workers carried boxes in and out of trucks. Everyone had their own tasks, their own schedules. No one knew that an old man on the bus was quietly planning how to stand his ground in a small house on a quiet street. When I walked back into the house that afternoon, Brandon was in the living room again, feet up, talking on his phone about a new project. He nodded at me without breaking his call. I went to my room and put the folder in the drawer of my nightstand. Then I took out my phone and began to scroll through my messages with Lena and Brandon. I saved certain ones in a special folder. I moved slowly, but I did not hesitate. Later, when the house was quiet, I went out to the garage. The boxes were still there, though some had been pushed farther back. I took out my phone and snapped simple, clear photos from different angles. The camera made soft clicks in the still air. I did not pose anything. I just captured things as they were. Then I stood in the middle of the garage and looked at the concrete floor. I felt tired, but not weak. The events of the last days had not broken me. They had brought something into focus. I could not change what my daughter and her husband believed about themselves, but I could choose to stand on the firm ground I had laid years ago and let the truth of it speak in its own time. The morning after my visit to the lawyer, I woke up feeling strangely clear, not happy, not sad, just steady. The folder in my drawer felt like a small weight in the room, not heavy, but present. I lay there for a few minutes and watched the faint light move along the ceiling. I knew I could not stay where I was, not in that house, not in that role. After breakfast, I told Lena and Brandon that I had been thinking about their suggestion. I said, in a calm voice, that maybe it would be good for everyone if I took some time away from the house. I watched their faces as I spoke. Lena looked surprised and then relieved. Brandon smiled like a man whose plan was working. I did not tell them where I planned to go. I only said that I would find a place of my own for a while. Lena rushed to say that she could call the retirement place again. I shook my head and said I wanted to look on my own. She tried to persuade me, but I held my ground. In the end, she said that any move, anywhere, was at least a step. Brandon clapped me on the back and told me that I would love the freedom. He said that this would give them all space. He told me that I could visit any time. The words sounded polite, but the tone made it clear he thought this house was now firmly his. That afternoon, I went to a small rental agency near the bus line. I asked about short-term leases. The agent showed me a list of modest units. One of them was a small studio across town, close to a bus stop and a grocery store. The photos showed plain walls, a narrow window, and a little kitchen area. It was not special, but it was mine if I wanted it. I signed the lease for 6 months. The agent slid the key across the desk. It was a simple metal key on a thin ring, but when I held it in my hand, I felt something important. It was a place separate from the story Lena and Brandon were telling. A place I chose for myself. When I told them later that day that I had found a place, they reacted exactly as I expected. Lena hugged me and said that she was proud of me for taking a step toward my own new chapter. Brandon said it showed that I understood what needed to happen. Russell nodded and said that this was best for everyone. I did not argue with their version. I let them have their words. I knew that the truth lived elsewhere now, in signed pages, in a drawer in Caleb's office, in records at the county building, in clauses at the bank. I did not need to win the surface story in the kitchen anymore. The move itself was simple. I did not own much that they had not already pushed into the garage. Over the next week, I sorted through my things. I packed clothes, my old journals, a few tools, and some pictures of my wife and Lena from years ago. I left most of the large furniture. I had no interest in fighting over chairs and tables. Lena helped me pack some boxes. At one point, she held an old framed photo of her mother and looked at it for a long time. Her eyes grew shiny for a moment, and her voice softened. She asked if I remembered the day it was taken. I told her that I did. For a little while, we spoke about old times, about school events and family trips. Then her phone buzzed. A message from Brandon broke the spell. She set the frame aside and went to check her screen. On the day I moved, Brandon loaded my boxes into his van. He drove me to the studio with cheerful comments about how I would love not having to hear a child running around all day. I listened without answering. When we reached the building, he carried the heavier boxes inside and looked around the small room. He said it was not bad. He said it would be easy to clean. He said I would have my peace here. I thanked him for the help. He clapped his hands together and said that now the house could finally breathe. That word stayed with me. After he left, the studio was silent. The walls were bare. The window showed a slice of the street below, a tree, part of a bus stop, a brick wall. I unpacked slowly. I put my clothes in the small closet, lined my journals on a shelf, and placed the framed photo of my wife on the windowsill. The room felt empty, but it was honestly empty, not quietly pushing me out. That first night I lay on the narrow bed and listened. I did not hear Mia's small footsteps or cupboard doors closing. I did not hear Brandon's voice through the walls. I only heard the distant sound of traffic and the hum of the building. It felt strange, but not wrong. This was a pause, not an ending. Over the next days, I settled into a new rhythm. In the mornings, I walked to the corner store for bread and fruit. I sat at the small table by the window and made simple meals. Sometimes, if the weather was good, I walked around the block and watched people heading to work, hands full of coffee cups and briefcases. Between these small tasks, I worked on my quiet plan. I went back to Caleb's office and sat in the same chair as before. We spoke about the steps he had outlined. He had prepared some documents. They were in a neat stack on his desk, clipped together. He did not slide them across dramatically. He just turned them toward me and explained in plain words what each one would do. He described how some papers would adjust the trust so that future rights would change if certain lines were crossed. He explained how another would formalize what was already true about my right to stay in the house in case anyone tried to challenge it. He talked about notices that could be sent, if needed, to inform people that their use of the house was not as solid as they thought. I listened, asked questions, and took notes. I made sure I understood the basic shape of what I was agreeing to, even if I did not follow every legal term. Then, one by one, I signed where he indicated. My signature was slower now than in younger years, but it was steady. When we were done, he put the papers into a folder and said that they would be processed in order. He also said that nothing needed to be rushed out the door that day. Timing, he said, could matter just as much as content. We agreed that certain steps would wait for the right moment. We also spoke briefly about the bank. He told me that he would send a respectful letter to the bank officer asking for a review of the situation. He said that we would attach some simple facts, nothing emotional, just dates, loan numbers, and copies of any records that showed how the house was being used as if it already belonged to my son-in-law. When I left the office, I did not feel excited, but I felt grounded. I was not guessing anymore. I was walking on a clear path. In the evenings, I kept my notes up to date. I wrote down short descriptions of any calls from Lena or Brandon. I printed out messages from them and slipped them into a folder. Sometimes Lena sent kind words about missing me in the mornings. Sometimes she sent links to photos of Mia doing crafts or running in the yard. I saved those too, for myself, not for any legal reason. Brandon's messages were different. He wrote about how the house felt calmer. He joked that Russell had already settled into his new kingdom. He asked when I planned to clear out the rest of my old stuff from the garage. I did not answer him right away. When I did respond, I kept my words short and polite. One weekend, I went back to the house to pick up some things I had left. It was late in the evening. The porch light was on. Through the window, I could see shadows moving and hear faint music. I knocked and waited. Lena opened the door and hugged me. She said Mia was already asleep. She led me through the hallway. The living room looked fuller, with more of Russell's items spread around. His chair, his photos, his coat hanging over the back of the sofa. My presence in the house had shrunk even more, like a picture fading in the background. In the garage, some of my boxes were still stacked against the wall. Others had been pushed farther into a corner. I sorted through them and chose a few more things to take to the studio. Extra clothes, a small lamp, a set of screwdrivers that I had missed. Before I left, I took a last slow look around the garage. I noticed how my boxes sat next to trash bags and broken items waiting to be thrown out. It said more than any speech. I lifted my phone and took a few more photos. This time, I spoke a date and time in a low voice as I did. I wanted a simple record with no confusion later. Back at the studio, I plugged in the lamp, set it on the table, and looked at the photos I had just taken. They were plain images: cardboard, concrete, dim light. Still, they showed what I needed them to show. I copied them to a folder on my computer and backed them up to a small drive. I had learned, over the years, never to rely on a single copy of anything important. Days passed. I kept my routine simple: walks, small meals, quiet evenings. But under that calm surface, pieces were moving. One afternoon, I received a short call from Caleb. He told me that the main changes we had discussed were now in place. He did not give long details over the phone. He simply said that things were ready if I wanted to use them. His tone was dry and careful, but I could hear that he had lined everything up. Around the same time, I got a message in the family group chat. Lena had created a colorful picture with text at the top that said, "Welcome party for Grandpa Russell and early birthday for Mia." The event was set for a weekend at the community hall not far from the house. She had invited relatives, neighbors, and some of Brandon's business contacts. The description talked about our home finally being complete and joked that they had made room for the true head of the household. People replied with smiling pictures and messages. Some wrote that they could not wait to see the new setup. No one asked where I lived now. They just assumed I would be there as a guest, if I came at all. I read the details twice: the time, the place, the list of people. I thought about what Caleb had said about timing and witnesses. I looked at the hall's address and pictured the room: long tables, a little stage at one end, space for speeches. Then I set my phone down, went to the small window, and looked out at the street. A bus passed, people stepped off, others stepped on. The world moved in its usual way. Inside my small room, something settled into place like the last board in a frame. On the afternoon of the party, I dressed slowly in my small studio. I put on my best suit, the one I had worn to Lena's wedding. It fit a little looser now, but the fabric was still good. I placed the folder from Caleb's office into a plain black bag. The bag did not look special. That was fine. The most important things in my life had never looked special on the surface. Outside, the air was cool. I took the bus to the stop near the community hall. From there, I walked the last few minutes. As I turned the corner, I saw cars lined up along the street. Laughter floated from the open doors. A banner hung above the entrance with my granddaughter's name and Russell's name in bright letters. Near the doors, I saw Caleb standing in a simple gray suit. Beside him stood a man and a woman I did not know. The man held a slim folder with the logo of the bank where Brandon's business loan lived. The woman carried a thick envelope and wore a badge that said she worked as a process server. They all greeted me politely. No drama, just people doing their jobs. Inside, the hall was bright with decorations. Tables were covered with white cloths and cheap centerpieces. At one end, there was a small raised platform with a microphone. On the walls, there were printed photos on boards. In almost all of them, Lena, Brandon, Mia, and Russell appeared. I found one where I stood at the edge of a group, slightly out of focus. That image summed up the story they had been telling about me. Lena came toward me with open arms. She hugged me and said that she was glad I had come. She said it meant a lot. I told her quietly that I would not miss a day that involved my granddaughter. Mia ran up, holding a balloon, and wrapped herself around my leg. I bent down and hugged her. That was the one part of the room that felt completely right. Brandon walked over next, smiling wide. He said he was happy to see me and that he hoped I was settling into my new place. His tone was cheerful, but there was a hint of pride under it, as if he spoke to someone who had finally accepted his plan. Russell stood behind him, holding a plate of food and looking around like a man inspecting his new kingdom. Guests ate, talked, and laughed. Some came up to me and asked how I was doing. A few spoke as if I had already moved on to a pleasant retirement life somewhere else. I answered politely and did not correct them. I knew that the story was about to change on its own. After a while, someone tapped a glass with a fork, and the room quieted. Brandon stepped onto the little platform and took the microphone. He thanked everyone for coming. He talked about how much it meant to have his father living with them now. He spoke about their home and how full of life it was with 3 generations under one roof. He made a small joke about clearing space and making room for the true head of the household. People laughed and clapped. Then he turned toward Lena and Mia and said that he was proud of the family they had built. He did not use my name. I was a guest in his story again. When he finished, there were calls for other family members to speak. Lena said a few gentle words about her daughter and about our house. Then, almost as an afterthought, she said that if I wanted to say something, I could. I walked up to the platform slowly. My knees were not as strong as they once were, but they carried me just fine. I took the microphone and looked at the faces in front of me. Relatives, neighbors, a few of Brandon's clients, people from the street, more witnesses than I had expected. I felt calm. I said that I wanted to thank everyone for caring about Mia. I said she was the bright point of my life. Then I said that I also wanted to clear up a small misunderstanding about the house people kept mentioning. I spoke in simple words. I told them that many years ago, after my wife passed, we had placed the house in a trust. I explained that the trust gave me the right to live there for the rest of my life, no matter what changes came later. I said that this right was recorded at the county office and confirmed by a lawyer. I did not raise my voice. I just laid the facts on the table, one by one. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some guests looked at Brandon. Others looked at Lena. I saw confusion on a few faces and sudden understanding on a few others. I went on. I said that the trust had also included expectations of respectful treatment from anyone who hoped to benefit from the house in the future. I mentioned, without drama, that there had been actions in recent months that did not fit that idea. I did not list every insult or every box in the garage. I only said that there was enough, on paper and in photos, to show a clear pattern. Then I said that, because of that, certain changes had been made. I explained that the trust had been adjusted so that the people who had pushed me out no longer held the claims they thought they did. I added, in plain words, that the house would not be passing to them as they expected. I said that other arrangements had been made for my granddaughter's future instead. The room went still. Brandon stepped forward and tried to interrupt. He said that I was confused. He said that everyone knew the house was basically his. His voice sounded louder than mine, but also less steady. I did not argue with him. Instead, I nodded toward Caleb. Caleb stood and announced in a clear voice that he was my lawyer. He said that the trust changes had been signed and registered. He held up copies, not waving them, just showing that they existed. He said that any interested party could review them in a proper setting. At that moment, the process server walked toward Brandon and Russell. She handed each of them a thick envelope. She explained, in a neutral tone, that the documents inside were formal notices about their occupancy of the house. She also said that they were now legally informed that their right to live there depended on my consent and on basic standards of behavior. Brandon stared at the envelope in his hands as if it might vanish. Russell opened his and scanned the first page. His face lost its color. He looked up at me with a different expression now. Not proud, not friendly, just shocked. The bank representative then stepped forward. He introduced himself and said that he was there regarding the business loan. He said that, due to new information about how the property tied to that loan was being used and how the cosigner was being treated, the bank would be reviewing the terms. He added that, until that review was complete, certain lines of credit would be paused. A few of Brandon's clients, who had been standing near the stage, exchanged glances. One of them quietly stepped back. The sound of side conversations rose around the room. Plates were set down, chairs shifted. The cheerful music in the background kept playing, oddly out of place. I did not stay on the platform. I handed the microphone back and stepped down. As I walked past Lena, she reached out and touched my arm. Her eyes were wide and her mouth trembled. She started to say something, but the words did not come. I did not pull away. I only said in a low voice that I had never left the house. They had just tried to write me out of it. Then I walked toward the doors of the hall. Behind me, I heard Brandon asking Caleb questions in a strained voice. I heard Russell raising his tone at the process server. I heard relatives whispering, trying to understand what had just happened. Outside, the air was cool and quiet. I stepped into the fading light and closed my hand around the small key to my studio and the mental key to my own house. Inside the hall, the story was breaking apart. Outside, I simply kept walking.